Happy Social Work Month. This is Simply Social Work. My name is Brianna. If you're new, welcome. This is the channel where I talk about all things involving mental health and social work, from the history of our social work to how to get the most out of your therapy to reviewing mental health depictions in pop culture. This is part 2 of my series on the history of social work here in Canada. If you missed the first video, I'll link it in the description box below, or you can click up here to check it out. We left off in part 1 at the end of 1890. The first era of social work was considered the era of moral reform, and it was all about societal judgments and paternalistic support from private philanthropy or charity. Today's video is going to cover phase 2 of social work in Canada, which is referred to as the era of social reform, from the years 1891 to 1940. So this was a time of major changes to Canadian economics, politics, and society. Canada was growing as a concept with fewer provinces than we currently have today. It was more of a confederation at the time, and Sir Macdonald's focus was all about expanding and creating a larger country. There had been the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway, or the CPR, and a dying fur trade meant that the Hudson's Bay Company gave up a lot of control of the northern lands. The 1890s also saw the Klondike Gold Rush, an evolution in shipbuilding, and electrical power being generated by Niagara Falls, which made hydroelectric power more accessible across the country. Industry was growing, which meant cities were growing, and it wasn't just the ways we approached trade, politics, or geography that was changing. This era saw a shift towards recognizing the need for publicly funded and operated welfare, as it became undeniable that urban areas were way too large for untrained charity workers to address problems alone. Although there was also a concern that if this wasn't provided, more poverty might mean mob violence and general chaos. So there was still in a way more of a concern for themselves and their carefully constructed status quo than the people suffering on the fringes of it. But still, it was definitely a step in the right direction, as it wasn't just a moral concern but a political one. And it was a step that was beginning to reflect the evolutionary strides of science. This is also when we started to see many people consider socialism a desirable replacement for capitalism, as it was put forward by the German philosopher and political economist Karl Marx. Marx and Engeles, which, yes, is a fun fact, little sidebar, the book was not just produced by Marx. Engeles has simply fallen out of the spotlight for some reason. They published the famous Communist Manifesto in 1848, but in the time of scientific philanthropy, many attribute Marx's thought as highly important to the modern labor movement. But more on that later. Thanks to the rising acknowledgement of the need for science, this is when we actually start to see empirical research methods being used to analyze social problems. This included tools like social survey research and royal commissions on issues like poverty, labor and capital, and the justice system. But of course, this doesn't mean that the transition was smooth or well received. As philanthropy moved from charity visitors to what we now think of as social workers, the change from free volunteers to paid professionals was often viewed with open criticism, as though wanting compensation for your efforts defeated the purpose of the good that you were doing. And as a sidebar, I feel like I say that a lot, but a girl's got tangents. It is what it is. This is often a problem that today we still see, particularly for underrepresented communities. BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and female-identifying professionals are often expected to provide presentations or other work for free or a heavily reduced rate under the guise of charity or exposure for their cause. Again, the narrative being used is that wanting to be compensated for your time and expertise is wrong or shameful, because it goes against the white Christian idea of charity. But we don't see this applied the same way to white cisgender men, so it's something to consider. Anyway, in 1914, the first program in Canada to train social workers opened at the University of Toronto, or U of T as most Canadians call it. And it was later the first school to offer a Master's of Social Work, MSW, and Bachelor of Social Work, BSW. From there, other schools with different approaches began dotting the country, and the Canadian Association of Social Workers, CASW, was established in 1927, which gave the field of social work professional prominence through collaboration and unity. This federal association is still in existence today, working together with provincial associations, although those came along later. Alongside the rise of trained professionals, social casework began to gain influence as the preferred method of choice. Casework as we know it today is the use of systematic methods of investigation, assessment, and decision-making in social work practice. But in the early 1900s, casework was seen by many as a way to use scientific methods to approach social change. If you remember before, it was a charity worker coming to your house and deciding if you were worthy or unworthy, none of which had any scientific or empirical validity or any assessment of anything that was actually substantial. It was basically an opinion. So this now often leaned on theories of medicine as well, using terms like diagnosis and treatment, and is thought to be how the medical model really began. Social work really expanded though after World War I, when veterans, immigrants, and people experiencing poverty needed support and resettlement on a much larger scale than what we had seen ever before. Over time, social work began to separate more and more from the church, creating a more secular, social reformist profession. Although it is worth noting that the social gospel movement, which began in 1907 and was centered around a more socially oriented church, did influence many social workers in their approach to the profession. Another big influence at the time on social work was the growing field of psychology, as Freud's theories were being taught by the 1920s with growing popularity. And of course, we end phase 2 of social work in Canada with one of the worst economic crises experienced, the Great Depression of the 1930s. The Great Depression was a time of mass unemployment, often terrible living conditions, and a whole host of mental health concerns that weren't really addressed at the time. It was a really bad time to live, and a lot of change and support was needed immediately, overnight. None of our systems, organizations, or institutions could keep up. And so by 1941, census records show that the social work profession increased by 63% from 1931. The way we treat the market, labor, or politics was never the same after the Great Depression. It left its mark on social work as a profession and those who were practicing at the time, as well as the greater society overall. And so there's a brief rundown on phase 2 of the history of social work here in Canada. I hope you found it interesting, or if you're here to help you study, I hope you found it helpful. You're going to nail whatever test you're studying for. If you did, be sure to give this video a like. Like I said before, this video is part of a series on the history of social work, so be sure to subscribe and hit that bell button so you don't miss any of those videos. I'll also link the playlist in the description box below where you can find other videos about social work, particularly here in March for Social Work Month. Thanks for watching. Take care, y'all. Time on social work was the growing field of psychology, as Freud's theories were being taught by